We're now going to continue the introduction to the skeleton by looking at the appendicular skeleton. So we'll first look at the upper limb and the shoulder. So that is the bones of the shoulder, which include the clavicle, sometimes called the collarbone by the lay people. It's also the most frequently broken bone in the human body. A little Jeopardy knowledge for you there. The scapula, the humerus, the ulna, the radius, and then the bones of the wrist and the hand. So there are 8 carpal bones, and you do need to know the names of all 8 carpal bones. There are plenty of memory tricks out there to learn those. The 5 metacarpals, which are numbered 1 through 5, starting at the thumb. And then metacarpals 2, 3, 4, and 5. Number 5 would be on the pinky finger. The phalanges are numbered similarly. So the phalanges in the thumb are number 1, 2, 3, 4, and then in the pinky they're number 5. But there's an added piece of naming them here. So phalanges can be proximal, which are the ones that are closest to the wrist, intermediate, ones that are in the middle, or distal, ones that are farthest away from the wrist. So digits 2, 3, 4, and 5 all have 3 phalanges, right? So if you bend your fingers, you'll see that there are 2 knuckle joints in there. That's because there are 3 phalanges, but in the thumb, there are only 2 phalanges. There's a proximal. The proximal is here, and then there's a distal phalanx, which is there. As you're studying, you also want to make sure that you can tell left and right for the major bones. At RVCC, you won't see hands and wrists disarticulated unless those are extra credit questions. That is also true for feet as well. So let's look at the lower limb. So the lower limb consists of the coxal bone, which is actually 3 fused bones. Ilium is this brownish one. Ischium is the purplish one. And then this sort of salmon colored one is the pubis or pubic bone. So one way that you can remember at least ischium is in your bum. That's the bone that you sit on. It's actually sometimes called a sits bone because that's where we sit. The pubic bone or pubis is exactly where your pubic hair is, not to put too fine a point on it. And then the ilium is the one where if you put your hands on your hips, you're actually putting them on the superior portion of the iliac bone or the iliac crest. Please do not call this a coxal bone in a testing situation, because you would need to name the specific part of this fused bone. The femur is probably the most difficult bone in a human body to break. It's the longest and the thickest. It's also used as a bone to help figure out measurements, height measurements of skeletons. The patella, sometimes called the kneecap by lay people, but not by those of us in A&P. The tibia is also the shin bone, as lay people call it. It's the one where if you bang it against something, it hurts a lot, because right here, that tibial crest there doesn't have a whole lot of flesh or muscle on top of it. So when you bang it, or anterior to it, when you bang it, usually you end up banging right on the bone. The fibula is the lateral bone on the leg, and its lateral malleolus makes up the outside of your ankle. The fibula is not really a weight-bearing bone. It's more of a stabilizing bone for tibia. And you do need to be careful to spell these properly. Fibia or tibula are not spelling mistakes. They are considered using the wrong words. Most of the time we're pretty lenient on spelling, but those two you really do have to spell properly or they will be not correct. So as we move down, you can see the medial malleolus of the tibia is the medial part of your ankle, the inner ankle. And then we move down to the foot. So the foot is composed of the tarsal bones. And unlike in the wrist, there are 7 tarsals, but there's 8 carpals. And this is kind of a silly way to remember the difference between tarsals and carpals. But you drive a car with your carpals, you walk on tar with your tarsals. It's silly, but it might work. And then the metatarsals, again, are named similarly to the metacarpals. The one on the big toe or near the big toe is number 1. The metatarsal on the pinky toe is number 5. And the same thing is true for the phalanges of the toes. And yes, the little phalanges in the little toe are really 3 different phalanges. So the big toe, just like the thumb, only has a proximal and distal phalanx. So proximal here, distal here. All the other toes, 2 through 5, have all 3, the proximal, intermediate, and distal phalanges. Phalanx is a single phalange. So just so you can see what that word looks like. So you would have one phalanx or multiple phalanges. Do remember as well that you will need to identify most of the bones disarticulated, and you'll see that both in the practice document that's been posted for you as well as in the lab assignments. So let's talk about one last thing, which is the differences between male and female pelvises. So these differences arise from functional variations that are probably well known to you. A female pelvis is built to house and gestate or grow a new member of the tribe, right? A baby is going to become, in our ancient world, a new member of the tribe. The male pelvis is built to run and hunt and gather, right? And that's not saying, our current understanding of male and female roles. This is talking about what these bodies were built for a couple of 100 years ago. So in order to accomplish that, the female pelvis, if you look at the pubic arch, that's probably one of the easiest ways to tell male from female. The pubic arch in the female is a much more broad angle, so it looks almost like a U. In the male, it's more of a V. And if you just look at the outline of the pelvic bowl in the male, it kind of looks like a V versus the female, where it looks more sort of softer and U-shaped. You can also look at pictures looking down into the pelvic brim, and what you'll see is that the male coccyx sticks pretty far into the pelvic bowl. In the female pelvic bowl, the coccyx and the sacrum are rotated back a bit more, so baby head easily fits through that pelvic bowl and then into the vaginal canal. In a male pelvis, the poor baby has nowhere to go, so there is no way that it could come out through the male pelvis. Female bones tend to be a little bit lighter, a little bit thinner, a little smoother, and much of that has to do with musculature. Testosterone promotes heavier, and growth hormone promote heavier muscle mass in men. So the heavier the muscle mass and the more muscles are used, the thicker and stronger the that bones have to become. They have to become more dense to support the pulling that occurs with muscle movement. So you want to be able to tell differences between male and female pelvises based on these functional variations, because form and function always go together.